Y Combinator is the world's most prestigious startup accelerator. With an acceptance rate lower than the top Ivy League universities, YC gives founders instant access to $500,000 in funding, hundreds of thousands of dollars in software credits, and a network of the world's best investors. This is Inside the Batch, where I, a YC founder, talk with other YC founders about how they got in, what they built, and what it really takes to make it. Today I'm joined with the co-founder of Mastra, a batchmate of mine. Thanks for coming on, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Really glad for you to make the time. So, could you start us out with what is the two-sentence description for your company?
So Mastra is the leading agent framework for TypeScript. So people build all kinds of agents, whether inside like existing SaaS companies or like an agentic screen inside that, or whether they're starting like a new company that's like getting into YC and is building an agent for some kind of industry.
What are some of the most common use cases for agents that people are building on your platform?
I mean, it's crazy to see like the huge variety, but there's like you need to think about every category of SaaS product, like an HR SaaS company, 1,000 person HR SaaS company. So first off, one thing to say, like Monster is free and open source, so a lot of people are building those, npm create Monster, download the library, and then kind of run off, and we'll never hear from them. So there's lots of people doing cool things we have no idea about, but like some of the stuff we've heard about, people are building across a wide variety of like SaaS applications, but people like HR SaaS, like finance, fintech, people are building in customer support. People are building like lovable type experiences for building like mobile games and like video games. But then also like people are building in all sorts of like old school industries. So like veterinary clinics was one from our batch. Another one from our the Vetneo guys. Another one from our batch. Like the artifact guys are building basically ingesting part diagrams in aerospace. So I need to create a cat diagram or an electrical circuit, but I got this 100-page long PDF and I need to ingest and process and sort of do some of the work of a hardware engineer. So I think like the real world use cases and applications are always some of the most fascinating to me.
How would you like what differentiates you guys from the other agent frameworks out there?
So one thing, we're TypeScript first, TypeScript only. So a lot of the agent frameworks are sort of Python first or Python only. And when we came onto the scene a year ago, like there really wasn't very much at all in TypeScript. And so like we kind of in terms of being an agent framework, and then like now there's a little bit more, but like we focus on like just having a really incredible developer experience. So I was previously the co-founder of Gatsby, the React Web framework, and my co-founders were two of the best engineers from Gatsby, and the whole team actually came over from Gatsby almost entirely, right? So we've just been doing open source JavaScript for about a decade now, and there's just like a lot of nuance around like how your APIs really work well together and having primitives that like work well together. The last thing I'd say is that like we wrote this book called Principles of Building AI Agents. It's a guide for people to get started. We're really educators, and like a lot the JavaScript world has a lot of people that are like sort of building in AI for the first time, and we're a very approachable and accessible framework for them.
I want to talk more about the book that you wrote because we were batchmates. I saw you distributing this book during our batch, and I thought it was one of the most brilliant marketing and awareness moves that any company in our batch took. And I'll be honest, when I saw you doing this, I was like really jealous. I'm like, why did I not think of doing this for something related to my company? Because this was something that I think was such a brilliant move. So could you tell like me a little bit more about one, what inspired you to write this book, and then a little bit about the distribution net metrics? Because I think you've published a bit about this. Of
Yeah.
how many books have you distributed? It's quite a significant number.
Yeah. So we uh, like I'll tell this kind of the origin story. So I kind of written a book before, and we actually early on in the batch, Pete Kazanji, who's the author of Founding Sales, is on our cat table, and one day Pete was like. I was just texting with Pete, and he's like, "Oh, I lost my distribution person at YC that used to give my book to all the founders." I was like, "I don't know, like we're in YC now. Maybe we can like hand out your book to the other founders in the batch." And so he sent us like 20 boxes of books, and I'm like. okay. And so then I like, it's like, hey, everyone in our batch like kind of like is, smart engineers learning how to sell. So like maybe I'll just, do a solid to all of the batchmates and just hand out Pete's book to them. And so we sort of stood outside the building during during like the group events, and we just hand out the founding sales books to people, and like, just do a favor. And then like afterwards, after we did this, we just were like, wow, people really like that. And then we were doing some whiteboarding sessions, and one day, like Shane, my co-founder, like turns to me and he's like, "So, what?" He just has heard me say the same thing over and over and over again with like users, and he's like, "What if we took that stuff and what if we wrote it down in a book? And then what if we handed that out to people?" And it's like, yeah, maybe that would work. Um, then, sort of to make a long story a little shorter, I locked myself in a room for a couple of weekends. Kind of wrote a book. I write pretty fast, and we got it printed in a couple weeks, and then we showed up to demo day with like 500 copies, and this House of Fine Arts, beautiful venue, all these investors. We just figured like. And it's like it's demo day. It's the only chance you really get to like have the eyes of the world on you. Like it'd be kind of like this like fun almost like stunt, we're just kind of having fun, right? We're like, this would be kind of fun. Like imagine how cool it'd be if we did this thing. Let's do it, and then we did it, and then people were like, oh wow, like this is really, really, really cool. Like you guys, this is amazing. This book is so helpful. It's like, I learned a lot about agents from it, and so to kind of continue the story, right? Like what happened, that was March, right? But what happened over time was that like we started bringing books to events more and more, and we kind of kept getting this feedback. And every time we got this feedback, we're like, well, let's print more books. And you know, fast forward sort of 6 months, we've got this whole sort of supply chain set up. We've handed out about like 82,000 physical books. We've sent out another 140, 150,000 like virtual copies. But just like built this like the book has turned into this like phenomenon in San Francisco. Uh, it's been, and actually in a lot of places as well, college campuses, et cetera. It's just been incredible to kind of see how things have unfolded.
I find it just such an amazing marketing idea because what you're essentially doing is providing significant value upfront for free to so many people that maybe have never heard of you before. And you're providing them actual knowledge and insights totally for free. And you're obviously benefiting from it because your company became pretty well known because of it. It's a thing at San Francisco. I really wonder if we're going to see more companies in various YC batches do this. I think it is such a brilliant move that you guys pulled off. And are you going to continue printing these books? Like, is there a limit of how many you're going to distribute?
I mean, it just becomes a logistical problem. Like we have sort of like two and a half sort of full-time people now helping kind of print and distribute, just get them in people's hands through various channels. And we spun up printing in India recently. Right now, we're looking for like an EU logistics like firm that can help us with that. We're going to do that in Canada. We've started sending them out now in books and boxes. When we started moving to boxes, we got because what started happening, we initially like got these like around May we started making these viral LinkedIn posts, and we get like 12,000 people commenting on these LinkedIn posts asking for a copy of the book, and we're like, wow, this is incredible. And so we started just mailing them to people that commented basically. And then after that, we're like, what if we ask people if they got boxes? And maybe like, because some people would ask us like, hey, I've got like a team I want them for. Like, I run this meetup, can I get like 30 books or whatever? And then so it turned out that like some proportion of the people that wanted books actually wanted like 30 books. And so, you small proportion times, 30 books for that small proportion, you sort of significantly improve like the amount that you're able to distribute. So I mean, I don't know what the limit is. We're just gonna have to see. I'm kind of here along for the ride along with everyone else. I do recommend it for founders that are that have legitimate domain expertise, whether they're coming into their startup with that or whether they develop it over the course of their startup. I have two friends that have written books as a result. My friend Manish wrote a book on ERPs. And brought it to like the NetSuite conference. My friends Michael and Marie. who are also YC founders, wrote a book on AI customer support, and have been giving that out. So it is actually kind of funny. Like, I just kind of tell people, like, look, if you're gonna do it, I'm happy to tell you about like how to do it. Just include a quote from me on the back. That's all I ask.
I think it's just such a great. It's amazing that you guys have done that. And I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing how many more copies you're able to distribute, and I'm looking forward to seeing how many companies are inspired by that. Because yeah, I think I'm probably going to be asking you later about some advice of the logistics of it and how to manage it. And yeah, I'll be sure to include a quote from you on the back
Totally.
because
Yeah.
it is such a great method of distribution. Okay, so shifting the conversation a bit, could you tell me like what is one of the biggest technical challenges in building a TypeScript first agent framework?
Yeah, so I mean, like, there's a few things, right? Like, a lot of it is like kind of the architecture. So, what primitives do you have? Are you sort of more workflow focused, or more, where you have kind of like a structured graph, or are you more kind of like agent focused, where you're sort of like calling tools in a loop? So that's kind of like, and we decided in that we'd actually support both of them and have them work together. That was a very novel architecture decision. It was kind of controversial at the time because people were in one camp versus the other, and we were like, why not both? And like we just kind of had this insight that, like, it's not like there was going to be one right way of doing it. It was just really dependent on your use case. And we went to support both use cases. So, I'd say like the and there's like a lot of these kind of related architecture things. So like how do you do sort of like model routing? Bundling in sort of like JavaScript world is tough. You have the CGM and EJ, you have CJS and ESM, which are sort of different bundling strategies. Your code needs to deal with tree shaking well. There's all sorts of like, how do you um, package a lot of different modules in a monorepo and have a good like pipeline for doing that we just kind of rolled up with all the same tools and techniques that we did at Gatsby, like, okay, we're gonna do it this way, that way, the other way. We're gonna use chain shots here, and so like we were kind of we're gonna do a bunch of like bundling magic that we learned back in the days of Webpack and Babel and so on, right? Like, so I think there's a lot of like sort of inherent framework complexity. There's a lot of you have to be there's a lot of framework design is a very difficult and rare skill. And what I mean by framework design is what should be the public facing APIs for this primitive that I'm shipping, like the function names, the parameters of my options, um, the examples that I'm using in my documentation to illustrate the primitive. This is like framework design is it's very difficult, and I think like some of the incumbent frameworks you could just see like they shipped like pages and pages and pages of APIs, and we're just like, yo, you guys have clearly never built a framework before because this is unusable. And so I think like that is, I don't know if I would call it technically complex, but it is a very difficult design challenge that you have to be really good at.
I want to also know how do you go about balancing control versus autonomy when building an agentic framework? Like how do you know what I'm saying? Like how do you balance that?
Yeah. For the agents that you're building with Mastra.
Yeah.
So we have, I mean, we have these two primitives, agents and workflows. And so what we say is that the agents give you more power, but less control. And then the workflows give you more control, but less power. And so it's really just a spectrum and a scale of where you want to be. We usually encourage people to start, um, to like if they have sort of an open-ended problem to like start with an agent. If they have like a very well, and then like over time, what they'll do is they'll find that their agent tends to perform poorly on some specific tasks or some specific combinations of tasks. And then there's specific ways you can use workflows or like an agent supervisor model or various ways of like reducing the level of autonomy on that particular task. Because what you found is that it performs very well for this group of tasks, but like this group of tasks like less well. And so you can start with more autonomy and then, or if you have a very specific idea of like, hey, I can see the branching logic in my head, the LLM is going to decide between these two nodes. We're just replicating this very well known. business process, like, that's a perfect match for like a agentic workflow. And so you should just start by building that. And if it turns out that like maybe there's an area there where like you need a little bit more power, again, you can compose the primitives. So you can put you can sort of have a workflow step that like you're putting an agent inside, right? That maybe does multi-turn, calls tools in a loop, takes two steps, decides what to do. So it's i- it's kind of a search process, right? Like you get as close to you can as you could to your goal. Like take another turn, try to get closer, and so on.
That totally makes sense. I'm also curious, between you and your co-founders, have you had any major disagreements as you've been building your company? And if so, what were they and how did it result? How did it make your company better?
I mean, like the three of us are like really close, and we have like a really good dynamic. I mean, Abby and I are the more sort of like strongly opinionated ones, although about different things. And so, if there's like a strong disagreement, it's usually like I was like shipping an API, and I'm like, "Yo, that API is completely like whack or whatever." Like, and then sometimes it's like, "Yo, you should have said something like 2 weeks ago or whatever." Right? Or it's like, and it's like, or but like I think like a lot of times like what we then I think in contrast, like Shane is like Shane's like incredibly like sort of like level-headed and steady, and so if like Shane is upset about something, he like automatically wins because like the amount that he's upset about something versus like Avi and I is like just smaller, right? So it's like okay, yep, that's we'll do this thing or not do that thing or whatever, right? Like I think that like it's the thing though is like we came to Mastra and we keep in mind we were building something else before. But like when we started building Mastra, it was almost like it went from like feeling like we were playing playing startup on like medium mode where we're like, how should we do this thing? Well, let's research the possibilities and evaluate them or whatever, to like, oh well, we need to do this thing. Yeah, so I mean this is the we know exactly how to do this. This is like the four-step plan for how to do this. Oh, who should we hire? Here's all the people we should hire. Sound good? Yeah. It was like almost like we had intuitions for how to do every step along the way. I think that's very unusual. I think that's helped us a lot because we've built a very similar version of the previous thing before. So we all have this like very shared mental model for how it's supposed to work. And so I think that like that gives us a lot of alignment that is a level that's like pretty rare in co-founding teams.
I think that's a really interesting point. It's funny you mentioned with your co-founder how the more level-headed one, when they're mad about something, you got to listen to them. It's like when you're in a friend group and the quiet friend is getting really mad. You screwed up, so you gotta. That makes a lot of sense. I'm also wondering, like, what like rituals or maybe quirks of your company do you have that maybe are unique to your startup that help keep you grounded and focused? Anything that you have advice for other founders in that regard?
Gosh, rituals. When we can, our section still gets together. I think we all probably go maybe at this point it's like once every 3 months, but I think the section gets together a little bit more frequently. On and like it's nice to be back and to kind of to see that group over time, right? I think we go to there's a bar nearby our apartment that we like there's like we'll go to together, and like I think like a lot of times it's kind of like it's just sort of like talking and processing like a lot of it is like talking and processing. So like a lot of times we're in different places, like Shane's in South Dakota, for example, and so like so like it doesn't necessarily so like a lot of our rituals happen happen virtually or happen virtually, but like there's also just a sense that like whenever the three of us are getting together, it's just like we kind of like say like what's bothering us at the time, like this thing isn't shipping, or like this partner is being frustrating, or like whatever the gossip of like our YC friend group is at the time, or the gossip of the the tool ecosystem that we're in, and what we've heard, and it's just kind of this like mutual brain dump where we all like we just like it's hard to describe. It's almost just like we're almost like all trying to figure out like with our collective brain what we do together.
I think that is great. What so many people outside of the startup space don't really understand, I find, is that I think a lot of the perception about startups is you need to have this like killer idea, and it's all about the idea. And it's not really, right? It's all about the actual founding team. And the most important part of the founding team essentially is the co-founder relationships. And if you guys can't get on the same page and can't work together and be in the same collective mind, as you're saying, then nothing will get done and nothing will be productive. So I think that's awesome. I want to shift it now a bit. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, just like we were like something that was unusual about us in the batch is we were all in our mid 30s. And that's, a decade older than like the maybe median founder in our batch. I think, two of us have gone through like divorces, right? Two of us have kids. We've gone through some shit in our lives, and I think like we have a level of like settledness, but we also understand of how much like relationships matter. And so I think like that was like something that like it was a kind of a little bit of a superpower that we brought to the table and bring to the table.
No, that makes a lot of sense as we've seen that like talking with a lot of people in the batch, there's a huge like swing in age from what it seems like. It sounds like a while ago YC was skewing older and now it's going younger again, but it makes a lot of sense because a lot of these really, really young founders may not have the maturity of being able to manage these relationships. And if you can't have a good co-founder relationship, you don't have a company, period. Nothing doesn't matter how good your idea is.
Really well put there.
So I want to ask you, tell me a little bit about, I want to ask you a little about your YC experience. Was there any piece of YC advice? And I think this is something so common for so many founders that they kind of ignore at first. Maybe there's a piece of YC advice and you go, I don't agree with this. This doesn't make sense. And then later it clicks for you and then you fully appreciate it. For many companies, they won't have one of these. Is there anything for you like this though?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we see is like I mean, like the what's on your shirt, make something people want, right? Like because like the thing is that like YC is full of like really smart people that are like, they just come in. But the reason to think about it's all about the ideas is because they've always had really good ideas, really different ideas than the people around them. But like what you discover when you're trying to make something new is that like your idea is the starting spot, but not the ending spot. And this kind of constant pressure of like talk to your users, what do your users say? Like, you know, I think we saw the here's the funny thing. Like last time when we were building an open source JavaScript framework, right? um we actually had this like grand idea and vision for what it should be, for what Gatsby should be. We thought Gatsby should be this like content mesh and like layer on, like what it turned out that people wanted was it turned out that people wanted a React Meta framework. And so next realized that people wanted a React Meta framework, so general purpose React Meta framework, and it made that, right? And that's why Next beat Gatsby. Um, and so like the sort of the lesson and the takeaway is that this like make things people want, listen to your users type, you know, aphorisms, like they might sound trite, but like they really make the difference between spending 7 years of your life building something that ultimately didn't succeed and like actually building a generational company.
I think that is so well put. A lot of founders have this arrogance almost that they know the market. They know what people want. I've been successful my whole life. I've gone to prestigious schools and done really well. Of course I can figure out what people want. But what people need to understand, especially founders, is that most people don't know what they're talking about a lot of things. And what I mean by this is you may think you understand the market, but you may not understand the market. And the only way to really understand if your idea is good is to go out and build it and maybe see. And maybe the market doesn't want it. Maybe your product isn't useful in with current demand. And this is why the idea for a lot of people, they tend to overestimate the importance of an idea of the startup. Whereas I will say right now, for people that want to apply to YC, you could have a S tier, totally fundable, totally hyped idea that would normally get someone into YC. But if you don't appear like a founder that looks like they're going to be able to execute on that idea and be able to listen to their users and potentially need to pivot, you're probably not going to get in. But if you're someone that maybe applies with, let's be real, a pretty shitty idea, which I think there's a lot of people that end up applying with pretty shitty ideas, and but you look like a founder that can execute well and you have a good co-founding team, you'll probably get in still. And so it's just so important to be able like to listen to your users and be willing to listen to the market, because you may not know what the market wants until you actually go out and try to build something. And then you realize this thing I thought the market doesn't want or need at all, this is actually the exact thing they want. And then that's when you start doing really well.
Yeah. And it, it turns out that it takes it takes a village here, right? And some of the villages your batchmates, and some of the villages your partner, and the other partners, and some of the villages the speakers that they come to bring, and maybe the other former YC founders that you meet in the community, and that maybe end up on your cap table post YC, and other like friends, other of your friends that like are going through something similar to whatever you're going through right now. And if you're not, like if you're not willing to rely on the village, um, I think you're gonna have a, and it doesn't mean that like you're always gonna be the expert. If you're doing it right on the most important things. But if you can't rely on the village to give you feedback, I think that just it even if like sometimes like the feedback is your feedback is like, aha, I hear what he's saying, and I'm not going to take it in the exact way he says, but I'm going to go maybe in the exact opposite way of direction. But but like, if you're not able to be responsive to what others are saying, I think your odds of success go drastically down.
I completely agree. What do you think is a misconception about being a YC company? Is there any misconceptions that maybe before coming into YC that you thought were the case that turned out not to be the case?
I mean, so for me, I read PG's essays when I was 19, and I'm 37 now. I worked for three YC founders before I started Gatsby, and so I've been a founder before, and I'd worked at three YC, for three YC founders before, and I read P. So for me, I think like not so much. I think people from the outside look there are people from the outside where they can look at YC as like a badge of success. Like, oh, you got into YC, and I think people are just looking at it the same way they look at like McKinsey or some other prestigious brand name, Google or like whatever, right? Nvidia, he works at Nvidia. It's like no, like humans are very like look like, are there YC founders that like rely on their YC brand way too much? Absolutely. Like, humans love to rely on brands instead of like trying to accomplish things on their own. We all know that. That's just our, but I think like, it turns out that like YC is just, what YC can do is it can help you get started. But you still got to get to the next stage and the stage after that and the stage after that. And you got to figure you gives this is all like a real time strategy game. You start with some resources and you got to get more resources over time. You got to figure out how to do that.
Exactly. So many founders hold YC at such a pedestal, but it's not even close to the like end game or anywhere even in the same vicinity. It really does is YC is extraordinarily helpful, and it makes building a company much easier, I would say. But it really is essentially just that. It is a huge boost. It is a huge help. But if you don't put in the work, you can't rely on the YC brand to carry you into being able to sell and get customers or anything like that. I think if you're a founder and you think that, oh, if I get into YC, then my company will have made it, it is not like even remotely the case. There is still so much work up ahead. But of course, the main benefit of YC is the community and access to other founders and being able to talk to so many people going through the exact same struggle in this school-like environment. And it's such a unique experience in that way. If you could go back to the beginning of the batch and just give yourself one piece of advice, what would you say?
Gosh. Um, I think just like we we're a perfect YC success story in a lot of ways. So like, kind of great, founders with a great story coming in. But like one thing that we just did in YC is it sounds dumb, but we did everything that we did. not quite everything, but like almost everything that the partners asked us to do that we were supposed to being a YC startup. We shipped a lot. We were like constantly like talking to users. We were like getting all of our batchmates like advice. We were like helping them. We were like getting to getting to know and so like and then like halfway through the batch we launched on Hacker News, and like that was the thing that kind of like skyrocketed us. We went from 2,500 stars to 7,500 stars, basically in a week because we did that launch, right? Um, and and I think, but like, here's the funny thing is like, if you look at like the effort we were putting over time, is like a lot of effort all the time, you know, and then like maybe there were like spikes here and there when there was like a big launch, but like it was like a fair, but then if you look at our traction, it was like very little traction, some traction, then the traction went like all up and to the right, and it wasn't like we were doing anything drastically different. I mean, we were maybe doing slightly clever tactics or whatever, but I think like in the beginning, like around 4 weeks in the batch, we were starting to get a little discouraged. We were just like, gosh, like we're doing everything, but like things are moving a little bit, but like not that much, and like and then like two weeks later, I think we just hit that up and to the right moment. And I think it's just like you have to keep. Sometimes you just have to keep plugging away at things. It's not always the case. Maybe sometimes you need to do something drastically different. But like, I think for us, like the first half of the batch was hard because it felt like, well, gosh, I keep trying, but like not seeing the results. But we were just kind of like, let's keep trying, and then it finally, then it, then we saw that.
It's so interesting because you never know when building a company that there's always this, when do you pivot? When do you not pivot? When do you do something different? When do you keep pushing? Because it's a great point. There'll be so many times you'll hear so many stories of founders that keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, and then eventually it all happens at once. But you also wonder, there's going to definitely be other cases where there's companies that maybe they're not working on a good idea, or they're doing something totally wrong, even though they're putting the effort in and it's not resulting. So it's always very, very tricky to know when you need to keep pushing and when not. But I think that's a really good point of that. A lot of times you shouldn't feel discouraged until like at least a certain predetermined time period has passed, where at least you can say you've given it every shot you can. Because if you had given up and tried changing strategies, doing something different early on in the batch, who knows what would have happened. But obviously, by continuing to push, you were able to be very, very successful.
I think another thing that ends up being important with that is like there's sometimes you like for us, like we knew that this was the problem that we had the most founder market fit on. Like we could just tell because it felt unusually easy, like not intuitive. We knew what to do, and like that gave us the confidence to keep going because it just felt so intuitive, even when we weren't sort of like objectively seeing the results. And I think like part of sometimes people pivot because they're not having success. And sometimes people pivot because they feel like this could be a great company, but it's going to be a great company for somebody else. Um, and I think like they're both. But like if you do that, like you need to have a really good sense of like this when you do find something that feels like a really good fit for you, that it feels because it's also like we see people that like they just keep pivoting, and you're like, yo, any of these could have been good things. Number four didn't have more founder market fit than number two, like, and it's just the novelty of the thing. Like the new thing always sounds more interesting than the old thing or whatever, right? Like you haven't yet seen the problems in the space, so it looks all shiny and new. So yeah, there's kind of this one's really hard, and there's not like a right answer, but you have to, the more you know yourself, the better you'll end up.
Yeah, I think so. You're right. Like a lot of founders fall into the grass is greener somewhere else mindset of, oh, if I just switch ideas, then it's all gonna work out because it was just these bad ideas. But sometimes that could be the case. That could very well be the case. But a lot of times it also may not be the case, and that you just need to keep pushing on your current idea. Even though, yes, there's problems. There's gonna be problems in any idea, in any market, in anything you do.
Hmm.
And I think you're right. It's like an unsolvable problem. The only thing you can do is just keep pushing regardless, whether it's on a new idea or the current idea. You always need to keep pushing because you're giving yourself that chance that that hopefully something can work. Okay, so last question here. Where do you hope Mastra will be in 10 years?
I mean, Andre, I'll put it this way: like Andre Karpathy is, giving a very well put talk, right? And he's saying, it's not that 2025 will be the year of agents. Like 2025 to 2035 is going to be the decade of agents. And so, like Mastra, like if we succeed in what we're doing, Mastra will be the default way of building agents. When you build agents, you'll by and large use Mastra. Maybe occasionally you'll want to use something else, but like it'll be the main way that people build agents. Tens of millions of people will build agents with Mastra. And if we're right, like, and if we're successful with that, you know, and if we kind of like zoom out, right, like it's happened in the past that there have been like new areas of engineering, right, that have developed. Maybe like if you think about over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, like data engineering or DevOps or right, like they've, and then there've been some like tools that have like developed around that, like maybe like Terraform, for example, if you're thinking about like infrastructure provisioning, and that had become almost like this default way of doing things, for long periods of time. And like you think Masha, this new field of AI engineering, of agent engineering is emerging, and we think there are going to be like either millions or tens of millions of developers that become proficient in this, and Masha should be the default way they do their work.
I love that. I think that is amazing, and I'm really looking forward to see how your company continues to grow. And yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Sean. This has been an absolute pleasure.